the three most important things when you're scaling a biotech product are yield, and of course, yield.
Right. Hey, Iram, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How's it going, Carl?
Pretty good. I'm excited about this next interview with Alexis of Polybion.
Yep, Alexis being the brother of Axel from our previous episode. And he is not only the co-founder, but CFO of Polybion.
Yeah, one of the things I mentioned before is that I've known the brothers and the company for a long time. We, Messaging Lab, did a small project with them. But one of the things that I really liked about them from the beginning is they were always talking about scale and yield. Yield was something that was very, very important to them. And I was always very impressed by that.
Yeah, yield, I would say, is the amount of product that's produced for any type of process.
And it would make sense because both brothers are very visionary, but I would say that Axel might be a little bit more visionary and Alexis is a little bit more nuts and bolts. But the two of them do talk about scale and yield a lot. And I think the reason for that is because they know that if they wanted to make a major impact on the global leather industry or the global materials industry, they had to be focused on scale and yield.
Yeah, because the clients that they will eventually have are these big corporations. They're making billions of tons of product. So they really need to, they being Polybion, really needs to rise to the occasion. If they're getting a seat at the table, then they need to be able to talk those large numbers.
Absolutely. So with that, let's just get the interview started with Alexis of Polybion. Alexis, tell us a little bit about the inspiration for starting Polybion.
We have always been inspired by both of our parents. Both of them are entrepreneurs. My mom, she's a chemist. She's been running her own business, her own laboratory for the past 40 years. And then my dad, he's retired now, but he used to be one of Mexico's most successful entrepreneurs back in the 80s. And this was a time when innovation was not sexy. It was not a trend. Nobody really cared that much about innovation. And he was manufacturing computers in central Mexico back in the 80s. He was a true pioneer. So we have always been very close to their inputs and their passion for creating companies and not just creating them, but taking good care of them. And also, I would say that my dad has always been in love with nature. He's a passionate bonsai crafter. He has bonsais that are older than myself or older than my older brother. And he has always been in love with nature. He's a great botanist. I would say a lot of our inspiration comes from my mom and my dad. So Axel and myself, we were always sure that we wanted to come up with some sort of biotech or tech venture. So when we both graduated from school, we took the shot. And I got introduced to biomaterials through my brother Axel, because he got to participate in this iGEM competition at MIT. That is where he first saw eco-based materials. And when he got back, he was really excited about it. And that's why we decided to start working with mycelium.
When we were all together at the Biofabricate Summit in 2022 here in Brooklyn, and you guys got to meet Eben and see Ecovative, what was that like for you?
It was really exciting to share the same stage of these very successful figures in the space, because I got to tell you that when we decided to come up with a biomaterials venture, the first thing we did is we tried to contact Ecovative so we could get a license. And so they didn't even answer. I guess they were just too early to give licenses. The fact that we even shared the stage with Ivan from Ecovative, it felt really good. It felt exciting and fulfilling. And I think it gave us a whole new level of energy to keep pushing and to keep going.
You were inspired by your mom and dad. Both of them were entrepreneurs. It was great to meet them in San Francisco. And then you started this company with your brother. But what was it like when you guys were little kids? Did you guys hang out and play together?
Yeah. We used to hang out a lot. I got to say, it was really fun to grow up with parents like my parents, especially with a person like my dad, who has always been a trend spotter. He would always talk about technology trends during lunch. He will always send us emails. He will always say, hey, you got to watch out with this new technology, with this new company. So it was very fun, and I feel that we should be grateful for having the partners that we have. And when it comes to working with my brother, I would say there are pros and cons for everything in life. It's great to have a chance to co-build something with your brother. It's good to have a person in your team in which you can trust in a deeper way than other people that is not your family. But yeah, I gotta say there are also challenges when it comes to working with your family. Sometimes things can become messy and unnecessary friction can come along because you're working with your family, right? With your brothers. And just as we used to play, we used to fight. But I would say they're just growing pains. And I gotta say that we have been able to come up with a sound team. My brother and myself, I think we complement each other. And yeah, because in a venture like Polybion, which is a biofabrication company, you got to be really good at a lot of things. You have to be really good at the microcosmos, which is bacteria, yeast, DNA, understanding how it works, but you also have to be really good at people. And you have to be really good at handling a business. I would say that just as DNA is the fundamental component of life and thus the fundamental component of every technology based on biology, people are the fundamental component of every business. So you have to be really good at both worlds, microcosmos and microcosmos. So I think we have been able to come up with a good team.
It sounds like your parents have been very influential to you and they're very clearly great role models. Do they still mentor you in Polybion? Are you still working with them?
Yeah, my father, Ariel Gomez Ortigosa, he was one of Polybion's first investors. And he also is part of the governance board for the company. So he's always trying to advise us. And he's been part of the Polybion story from day 3. So he's part of the Polybion family for sure.
Why don't we talk a little bit about the company? We've seen the material. Listeners to this podcast can log on to your website, polybion.bio, to get a picture of it, but it's a lot different when you hold it in your hands. But describe the origin story of the material and how you guys landed upon creating a leather substitute as your first biomaterial. What is the material? How is it used? How's it been tested?
In the beginning, we tried to get a license from Ecovative. We weren't even thinking in producing a leather alternative. We wanted to go for the molded shapes technology in order to come up with the styrofoam replacement. So we worked in that application for perhaps 4 years. But then my father, again, he became an investor in Microworks. He was one of the first Microworks investors. And he started trying to push for a leather application because a leather application has financial wise a lot of advantages compared with the styrofoam application because leather has a higher yield. So you can come up with a small production, but still be able to come up with a good enough profit, especially when everyone is paying all these premiums for biofabricated leathers. He started pushing for a leather application. Then we got connected through him with Microworks. We were really close to executing a deal with them. We were proposed by them to become their manufacturing company in Mexico so they could push their costs down, but it didn't happen. We actually lost 7 months of work by focusing on this project that ended up being unsuccessful, but that brought us to the point where we are now. It was like a wake-up call. We figured out at that time that we needed to concentrate on a leather alternative. And then we also figured out that we were located in Guanajuato, which is a state that has been known for several things, but among these things, for its leather industry. There is a 200-year-old leather industry established in Guanajuato. So I would say everything started getting connected by itself. And then a friend of mine, his name is Pepe Armenta, one day he stopped by your office and he said, look, I have this really cool kombucha fungi. This is SCOBY. I think you guys should look it up and see if you can make something good with that. We were already working on mycelium as a leather alternative. And that is when we decided to also start exploring bacterial cellulose as a leather alternative. And then I would say that a lot of mycelium companies started popping up like popcorn. So it became clear that we needed to go for the bacterial cellulose application. And then Axel came up with the idea of using fruit waste to grow this bacterial cellulose. We started to see that it had a lot of advantages when compared to mycelium, not only because the fact that you could use agroindustrial fruit waste, which is also really abundant in this part of Mexico, but also because you can inoculate this organism in a liquid state, whereas mycelium, you have to inoculate it in a solid state. There are some people that inoculate it in a liquid state, but the final material is not as strong as the ones that use solid state inoculation. So I gotta say, it's funny because if we had planned this, maybe it wouldn't have turned out the way it has. I would say there is a magic component in the Polybion story. Things just started getting connected as we started working with bacterial cellulose.
Could you talk a little bit about the difference between the mycelium-based leather or the leather substitutes that are being produced using mycelium versus what you guys are doing with bacterial cellulose?
First of all, you're working with a different organism. So bacteria are simpler organisms. They have less complex genomes. So they would be easier to engineer. In fact, we have been engineering bacteria and yeast since the 80s. There is a lot more research going on around bacteria than there is around mycelium or fungi, which recently became a trend. That is one thing. The fact that we can use sugar-rich biomass or fruit waste to grow bacterial cellulose is a great differentiator from mycelium. The fact that we can add this component of upcycling food waste into the formula, it's very appealing, especially to funds in Europe and the US, and it's also very appealing to companies. So that is the second thing. I would say the third thing, and perhaps it is the most important thing of all, is the fact that fungi are prone to contamination. They are really easy to get contaminated. And that is why we believe that mycelium companies have been struggling with scaling. Let's talk about, for example, about Microworks or Boltreads. Microworks has been able to raise over $200 million. Boltreads have been able to raise over $500 million. And they've been working into the field for 5 to 6 years, and they have not been able to really scale. So our guess is that they are struggling with the yield. When you're working with bacteria, of course, you also have to be very careful. But I would say it's easier to get a good enough yield so you can actually scale and come up with a sustainable business. And the reason why this happens is because bacteria reproduces faster than mycelium and it eats simpler nutrients. So the fact that it grows faster, it's a great advantage when it comes to keeping your yield high enough. I would say the biggest scaling challenge for companies like Polybion right now is the yield. And we have this friend that always says that the three most important things when you're scaling a biotech product are yield, and of course, yield.
Right. We've known each other 4 or 5 years at this point. And I think there's two things that I wanted to mention and just talk about. One of the things that I always liked about you guys from the beginning was you were talking about scale from the very beginning. Like scale up was something that you were thinking about right from the beginning. And I think a lot of SynBio, even biotech companies, they're not thinking about scale. They're still trying to solve those technical challenges, which bring a lot of risk to investors. And then the other thing, which may or may not be true, but the way I used to tell the story was always like, these guys are in Guanajuato. You said there was a 200-year leather tradition there. I know that León is the biggest North American shoe manufacturing site in North America. And I was always under the impression that you guys had good relationships with shoe manufacturers so that when you were prototyping, you were able to go to people who would be able to use the material and tell you whether it would work or not. Is that true or not? Or did I just invent that story?
No, it's true. We have good relationships with people that run large scale facilities that specialize in footwear and in tanning and retanning and finishing of leather. So the fact that we have these relationships, the fact that they are 25 minutes away from where we're based has been very important when it comes to accelerate the iteration cycles for a company. Not only in the tanning, retanning, and finishing, but also in the prototyping part of the R&D process, which is really important. There's one thing to grow the material, and there is another thing to tan, retan, and finish the material. And then there is another thing to actually craft a product with it. You have to see how it performs in the manufacturing process of a product. But yeah, I would say this has been very important for us as a company. The fact that we are really close to this tanning and footwear mecca.
But it's not just the shoe manufacturers in León, but it's also, there's a lot of automotive manufacturing. Do they make car seats there?
Yep.
You talk about this 200-year-old leather tradition. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, Guanajuato used to be an agricultural powerhouse. And in the past 25 to 30 years, in the beginning of the NAFTA, which is now known as the MEC, the free trade agreement between Canada, US, and Mexico, since the beginning of that agreement, basically Guanajuato became an automotive mecca. We have 5 OEMs established in the region. They are doing everything from car seats to door panels to a lot of things to the automotive industry. They are even producing cars in here. There is a very big General Motors facility in Silao, which is like 15 minutes away from where we're based. The automotive industry became very big. It is now the biggest industry in the region. But then a very interesting thing happened also. the agricultural industry turned into an agro-industrial industry. So we have now a lot of companies that package foods in this region of Mexico in the past 25 years. So even though a lot of fruits are not produced in central Mexico, they're produced near the coasts, they are packaged in here. So the scrap is generated in this area. And that is basically the raw material we use to grow psyllium, which is our leather alternative. But yeah, those two industries are, let's say, brand new in Guanajuato. So we now have an agro-industrial industry, an agricultural industry, a leather industry, and an automotive industry. I think it's a good place to be producing biomaterials. It's a good place to scale a company. I would say the only challenge that we have is that we don't have this access or accessibility to world-grade talent pools like the ones you get in the US. We don't have these super fancy universities like, for example, Berkeley or MIT. So I would say our biggest challenge these days is to grow a team that can compete with our peers that have access to the best talent available in the US and in the world. Yeah.
But you've still scaled a pretty sizable team. How big is the team now?
So we used to be I would say like a 3 or 4 people team about 2 years ago. And now we are well on the way to reach 30 people. And we should be about 40 people in the next 6 months. I have this friend who is a successful entrepreneur, and he always says that the biggest jump is going from 2 people to 40 people, because this is the station where you need to come up with the corporate structure that will become a scaffold for the rest of the company. So we are going through this stage. That's why we're sleeping very little these days. We have our stress levels super high, but I think we are very close to getting through this stage.
And where are you recruiting people from?
I would say that 60% of the current executive team and the middle managers that currently work for Polybion used to work with me in the past or are related to me somehow through friends of mine. For example, if we use Diogo's example, Diogo is Portuguese. He used to run a large-scale textile company for the automotive industry in Silao, Guanajuato. This is a European-owned company, and they basically sent Diogo to Guanajuato to build and ramp up a facility in this region of Mexico. And then like 5 years ago, Diogo got married to my best friend. It took me a while to realize that he could become a good COO. And our chief scientific officer, which is Manuel Aguilar, he used to be Axel's teacher at Monterrey Tech, which is Mexico's MIT version. And that is where Axel studied, where I studied, with my dad and grandfather studied. So that's how we met Manuel. So I would say 60% of our current team, we hired them through personal connections or business connections. And then the other 40%, we have been recruiting them from state-owned universities, public universities like Universidad de Guanajuato or ITESI. And I would say there is good talent in there, but you can't compare it with the big universities in the US and Europe.
You said you're going to open a facility in Ensenada, which has the largest concentration of life scientists in Mexico.
Yes, we now have 4 scientists working at the Ensenada laboratory. This is, of course, a very small laboratory. It's a DIY laboratory. In fact, it was built in Manuel's house. It's a very efficient laboratory because he has been able to basically deliver all the milestones that we proposed to the fund that led us USA. But yeah, Manuel is running that laboratory. Like you said, Ensenada is the PhD capital of Mexico. So I'm not too worried about recruiting scientists. I'm a bit more worried about recruiting other positions, for example, marketing specialists and project managers, designers. That is the kind of positions that I think we're going to have to try to get them abroad from other places out of Mexico.
If you're looking for this talent, like marketers and project managers, would you look to hire them and bring them down to you? Or would you entertain remote? That's like the big conversation that everyone's having right now, is the remote workplace versus in person.
That is one of the challenges that we have. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what has happened the past couple of weeks in Mexico, but I think the US government has even recommended not to fly to specific areas of Mexico. So we are considering maybe building the next production facility in San Miguel de Allende, which is a beautiful colonial city that is full of people from abroad. There is this community from people from the US, Canada, Europe. So it's a very appealing city for people coming from out of Mexico. So we could come up with a second facility close to San Miguel de Allende, and we could attract people easier. We could propose that they can live in a beautiful city, San Miguel, and they could work in there. But we are also exploring for sure hiring people from abroad and working remotely. What do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly do it when you're considering the positions that you're looking for, project manager or marketing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversation about the hybrid workplace. So having some people come in some days, I think that'll be hard depending on where the people are living. If we want to create a company culture, having people together is just, you can't replace that type of connection, right? But if you have a certain workflow and operation, able to meet and then send them off to go home and work remotely and then come back. Like, Carl, what do you think?
It's a huge debate in the work world what the right structure should be. And I think that if you go to a kind of hybrid model where some functions are remote and then you give people the opportunity to either come to Irapuato or to San Miguel Allende, I think that people want to go to those places. And the nice thing is for you, both of those cities are in your same states. They're not that far away from each other. You can make it a more regular occurrence when it comes to hybrid work. But I think that when you consider doing a hybrid workforce, then you're opening yourself to global talent. You're not just restricted to what you have locally or in Mexico. And so that could be very attractive. But I think it brings challenges. Ram and I talk about it all the time, even though we're in the same city and we see each other regularly. This is something we talk about a lot, is who's the next hire and where are they going to work and how do we want them to work?
Yeah, I got to say the biggest challenge in that model, in that hybrid model, would be complaints from employees, because you have these employees that have to be almost 24/7 in the operation of the manufacturing facilities. And then you bring in these other employees that can just work remotely and fly down to Mexico whenever they want and then get back to the US, or I don't know. That's challenging. When it comes to my opinion, I think it's going to be hard to handle that, different working conditions for different employees.
That's a super interesting challenge. And I would really be interested in looking at other big companies that do have these 24/7 facilities that have to be manned by people, and how and if they manage remote workforces. How do they do it? What are the best practices? And I bet a lot of that is still being defined, because I think if you're someone who has to be there full time and you're taking care of organisms, you understand you've got to be present, but you might have to be trained to understand that not everybody has to work that way.
I would just add to that, we could borrow from the healthcare industry, because nurses have to be on call or have to be present almost 24 hours. Some of them are worked really hard, but I've seen some hospitals where they'll have nurses work like 10-hour shifts for 4 days, and then they'll give them 3-day weekends so that they can have that freedom, a little bit of freedom, right? A little bit more flexibility, giving them those 3-day weekends. So that's one way of
That's a good idea.
Working towards it. And ultimately, you see some of these big CEOs like the head of Goldman Sachs, or obviously Elon Musk has made his claim that he wants everyone working 40 hours a week in person. So you're the leader of the company. You have to make the decisions. So if you want your employees to come maybe a week, do an intensive training, everyone together, and then, the people working in manufacturing go back to the manufacturing as they are. And then those that are more like soft skills, they can go work remotely for 3 weeks, but then come back for another week in an intensive. So those are like models that I have seen.
Thanks. I would say this is Polybion's biggest challenge going forward, or one of the biggest challenges we face. So we'll have to handle that.
Let's talk about the product first, because I think, like I said earlier, you can look at it on the website. When you hold it in your hands, it's a little bit different. But talk about, when you describe the product to people, what is it? Why does it perform like leather? Why doesn't it perform like leather? How do you compare it from a performance point of view? But talk about how it's manufactured, how does it perform, and where is it used or going to be used?
Okay, so first of all, to give some context to the listeners, I would say that Cellium is the name of our first material, and Cellium is basically a leather alternative for plastic leather and animal leather. But the interesting thing about this alternative is that it is grown by feeding fruit waste to bacteria. So we are turning agro-industrial fruit waste. Remember, I told you a couple of minutes ago that it is extremely abundant in this part of Mexico. We are basically turning that agro-industrial fruit waste through a formulation into food. And then we feed this to bacteria. And bacteria, as it grows, as it metabolizes, it transforms these nutrients into energy. And as a byproduct, it creates a bacterial cellulose nanomatrix, which is like a chicken tender-like material. We tend to call it pechuga de pollo, which is chicken tender. The fact that it is similar to leather is that it is an organic material, okay? So it means that we can run it through tanning, retanning, and finishing procedures. You cannot do this with plastic leather. So that is a very important thing regarding Cellium and when compared to plastic leather. So the fact that it is organic, it means that you can apply all these leather procedures to make it, customize it, to make it flexible, to make it more stiff if you want to. You can play with colors through the retanning. You can play with embossings. Also, you can create this cross-linking effect that is very well known in the leather industry, and it is what enhances leather performance capabilities. So the fact that you can apply all these leather techniques to the material is really interesting, and it is the reason why the end product looks a lot like a thin organic leather. It resembles like a thin animal animal leather. I gotta say that we are not trying to replace leather. We don't see psyllium performing in the same way as leather or plastic leather does. We are in fact trying to come up with a new commodity that will behave in its own way. Of course, right now, the best reference we have to communicating with brands is leather and plastic leathers. Okay. And we're not trying to replace these materials. This is just like a reference for us right now, leather and plastic leather. Eventually, we want to come up with a whole new textile because it is a whole new material. I don't know if you guys knew, but leather is composed of a protein called collagen. Our material is not a protein. It's composed of a carbohydrate, a polysaccharide, which is bacterial cellulose. So it will never behave in the same way as leather does, but we have been able to achieve basically the same level of performance when it comes to plastic leather. And we are about 75 to 80% there when compared to animal leather. But there are some very specific tests that may never behave in the same way as leather and plastic. This is a different material. And this is especially important with working with brands because brands are used to work with leather and plastic leather. They've been working with these materials for, 50 to 60 years. So it's very important to be very clear from the beginning with these brand collaborations that we're going to use leather and plastic leather as a reference, but it won't behave the same in every test. In most of them, it does. But I would say this is a fun and interesting challenge that we have when working with brands. But I see a shift in mentality with the recent collaborations that we have been working with.
That's really interesting. So you're not replacing leather, but you have a similar performance up to 70% of animal leather. Is there a performance that can go beyond traditional leather? Like how can it outperform existing leather? Can it be like waterproof? Can you instill other functionality because you're working with this material on such a fundamental level?
Yeah, I gotta say that in the future, we're gonna surpass leather in every way. And we can choose two weapons to come up with a material that outperforms leather eventually. The first one is tanning, retanning, and finishing. We are barely scratching the surface when it comes to learning how to effectively tan and retan this material because, like I said, this is not a protein. This is a carbohydrate, right? So all the tanning and retanning formulations don't necessarily apply to bacterial cellulose. They were created for a protein, for collagen. So we have been reformulating for the past 2 years and we have made a lot of progress, but we are still just on the tip of the iceberg when it comes to learning how to increase the material performance through effective tanning and retanning formulations. That is one thing. That is how we're going to keep improving the performance in the short term. I would say that in the medium term, the biggest innovation that will allow us to come up with a material that outperforms leather is synthetic biology. That is why we came up with the genetic engineering laboratory up in northern Mexico. The fact that we can use this organism, this bacteria as a platform to craft new molecular combinations is a very exciting opportunity for us. So I would say that in 5 to 10 years, we're going to be able to come up with molecular combinations that don't exist in nature, at least combined. They exist separated like collagen and carbohydrate. So through synthetic biology, we will be able to craft our own molecular combinations. And we're going to rely on life's molecular palette. The possibilities are endless, and we are barely scratching the surface when it comes to really exploiting synthetic biology for materials and biomaterials.
So are you saying that, for example, now you could take psyllium and put it into a shoe and it's going to give you 70% of the performance characteristics that you would expect from leather, whatever that means? Maybe it wears out a little faster, maybe it's more waterproof, maybe it decomposes better when you put it in the environment. Like that's the 70%. But then when you think about using synthetic biology to engineer the bacteria that are producing this biomaterial, you could conceive of it as being something that, for example, 2 generations from now, spacesuits could be manufactured from a material that you guys are making, which, by the way, NASA awarded a contract to a company for $250 million to produce the next generation of spacesuits. And I don't know what kind of material they're using, but I could see a material like yours engineered specifically for that usage.
That's right. And also, this is a very interesting point that you just presented. We could use the technology to grow biomaterials in space or in other planets. Because it's going to be costly to bring materials from the Earth to space or to Mars. So you're going to have to work with bacteria. You can bring bacteria in petri dishes, and then you can come up with biomanufacturing facilities to grow everything in space or Mars. But yeah, I think, Carl, the most interesting thing is that we're going to be able to create new materials never seen before, but using the same molecules that life has been using for the past 3 billion years. And this is a fun fact. Did you guys know that cellulose is the most abundant biopolymer on Earth? More than 50% of the world's biomass is cellulose. Basically, plants and trees are different combinations of cellulose and lignin. So there should be a reason why nature has been using cellulose so much for so long. And we believe that reason is because it is extremely versatile. It can be combined with other molecules to come up with more complex molecular structures.
So when you're talking to brands about Celium and you're showing them samples and you tell them, look, we've got 70% of the performance characteristics of leather, but you're going to have to rethink how you do this. What's the reaction from the brands when you show them the material and you explain these are the performance characteristics?
It depends on the brand you're working with, and it depends if they are used to plastic leather or animal leather. I can tell you, for example, that the biggest sneakers company in the world is going to be visiting us. They already run the material through testing, and the results were great because they are comparing it with different plastic leather that they currently use. So the material is ready for them, okay? And they're using it for sneakers. Of course, this is a company that is so big that it has the powerhouse to bring in a new material and then not just testing it and prototyping things with it, but also they have the apparatus to introduce it in their production chain, which is the hardest thing to do. This is the part where there might need to adjust some stuff so that it can work in an industrial shoemaking facility. But I would say that 70% of animal leather is already good enough. The material is ready for making products. And this is, let's call it, this is Celium version 1. I would say in 6 months, we're going to be able to have an improved version, basically relying on the expertise that we're going to gain from these collaborations. They're going to help us in multiple ways. They're going to help us understand what kind of adhesives you should use to glue this material with other materials. They're going to help us find out how can we come up with a coating that is not for example, plastic-based, a bio-based coating. So I would say collaborations are going to play a very important role when it comes to bringing Celium to the next level.
I want to circle back because when we talked about performance characteristics right now are maybe being developed or enhanced or modified, we're learning from people in the tanning industry. So tanning right now is a very important part of how the Celium material is changing or it gets changed once it's manufactured. But I'm curious if you could describe that a little bit.
If you take leather as it is, when you rip it up from a cow, you can't use it for anything. The real important part of the process that brings leather to a usable material is tanning and retanning. This is the part where you can create the cross-linking effect that makes the material more dense and improves the performance, the mechanical performance. And then it comes the retanning, in which you play with the aesthetics of the material. You play with color, with flexibility, with stiffness. We have still a lot to learn in this area. Just to give you an example, 2 years ago, we sent a piece of Celium to a sportswear company, very big. I think it was founded in Vancouver, Canada. And they basically said, no, we cannot work with this material. It's not ready. We sent another batch of samples to this company about 1 month ago, and they want to start now. So that is a very good example of how we have been able to make a lot of progress, both in the biological part of Celium, growing, picking off canvases with a good yield, and also in beginning to understand how the tanning can improve the performance, the flexibility. One very important thing to point out, Carol, you cannot use bacterial cellulose at its raw form. It will dry out just like a leaf. So there is a lot of R&D in the tanning and retanning to make sure that you can turn that raw bacterial cellulose in a usable material that won't decompose just as a leaf does.
What's it like when you guys go to these traditional tanneries? These guys have been tanning leather for 50, 100 years, and you bring them this new material and you say, we need this tan. What do they say to you? What's their reaction?
It's never a good reaction. In fact, the first one we approached, a very big exotic leather producer in León, Guanajuato, he basically laughed at us. He said that this was just like a small trend that would go away in 2 years. And there are other tanning entrepreneurs or businessmen that are very jealous about their industries. We have been really careful in who we approach. And we have been trying to not be very noisy in central Mexico. So we are trying to be very noisy outside of Mexico, but in this part of Mexico, we're not giving interviews. We're not participating in any kind of event because these guys, the guys working with leather, they are worried. They are worried that their industry might shift dramatically in the next years.
You say that there's a lot of R&D that has to go into tanning these new materials. Wouldn't it be in their interest to at least be paying attention to it and maybe saying, hey, we want to learn about this because the leather industry is going to change. And so if they're going to be on the trend, they have to know how to work with these new materials.
I totally agree with you. It should be in their advantage, but these are old-fashioned, very traditional leather tanners or retanners, and their industry has always been known for being very close, very jealous. They even fight within each other inside the industry. And I don't know, maybe they're going to get Kodak, like what happened to Kodak. So we were really careful in finding two guys that are working for an American-based company that sells tanning and retanning products for these tanning companies. And they have been working with us. They have been our advisors when it comes to beginning to learn how to tan and retan this material. But I'm sure you're aware of this. We already bought the equipment to do all the tanning and retanning internally because we don't want to make noise. We just want to keep improving the tanning, retanning internally. And once we are ready, once we have fully understand that world, then we might be able to open up and maybe work with these companies through a licensing model, through an outsourcing model, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, I think it was interesting at the Biofabricate conference. There was this Dutch guy who came from a family of tanners. I think he was like fourth generation in the leather industry. And then now he's working with Mark Post on this new leather company. Obviously, there's some interest, but I also could see what you're saying in terms of the tanning industry being very insular and not open to innovation, but we're heading towards the Kodak moment, not just for them, but in other industries too.
Yeah, they are old-fashioned guys. They are seeing it completely wrong because we're not trying to replace leather. In fact, the cool thing about bacterial cellulose is that you can just plug and play it in these tanning facilities, okay? You just need to reformulate. So they're not going to go out of business. They might just need to change what the leather guys call the substrate. So instead of tanning cow leather or I don't know, snake leather, they're going to be tanning bacterial cellulose. They're going to have to reformulate. But I don't know what to say about these guys. We have been called fools, idiots, crazy, everything.
The biggest innovators are always called crazy and unrealistic, that they're doing insane things, and they turn out to be Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
You're on the right track. That's good. You should hear more of that.
I have this funny story that this guy that I just told you about, he was running an exotic facility in Leon, and we approached him. We basically told him that we wanted to partner with him so that we could understand the tanning and retanning. So he took this really small piece of serum that we brought and he ripped it up. He said, it ain't gonna work, guys. It ain't gonna work again. And that was it.
Wow.
That was like 5 years ago. Yeah.
That's crazy. So let's switch gears a little bit because you guys have built a facility in the state of Guanajuato. It's a large facility. You're employing 40 people. But I think from the beginning, you guys have always said that you're very interested in circularity. Why is it a sustainable facility?
I would say that Polybion's purpose is creating a more sustainable world by harnessing biology and applying it to material science and circular production models. So it's embedded in your DNA to try to make a dent when it comes to sustainability in the world. So everything that we do internally is always trying to push sustainability to become mainstream. Also, the single most important thing to brands right now is carbon footprint or LCA analysis. So that is why we decided not only to use agro-industrial food waste as raw material, which makes our production process circular, but we also decided from day one to come up with a facility that would run on solar power and would recycle the water used to grow every batch. So that is how this facility was built. So it's a 14,000 square feet facility that runs on solar power, that recycles the water we use to grow every batch. And I would say it is as circular as it gets. And at its maximum capacity, it will output 1.1 million square feet per year. We should reach that maximum capacity by the third quarter of 2023. That's why we are raising a Series B. It is completely a CapEx play. We need the money to build more incubators, buy more trays, buy more bioreactors. And so far, we have been able to get very close to the 70,000 square feet of material per year, which is a high production if you compare ourselves to Microbes and Bolt Threads. But yeah, that is more or less the facility. And whatever next facility we come up with, it's going to be the same. We will always push to use solar energy. We'll always push to recycle water. That's who we are.
That was a great episode.
It's super interesting that a number of our episodes lately have really been talking about the environmental impact of biotechnology in general. Our conversation with Shara a couple of interviews ago was about how they could impact deforestation. And Axel and Alexis are also, in a way, talking about deforestation because a lot of the deforestation that happens, especially in Brazil, in the Amazon is to grow cows, not just for the meat, but for the leather.
They even look at the fruit waste. That is their feedstock. Specifically, I think they're using mango. Is that
That's
what
right.
it
It's
is?
mango waste.
And is it at like a juicing company? Like a
I
mango
don't,
juice
that I
company?
don't
Oh,
remember.
I wonder. But it's great that they're able to use waste, really being a circular company. And they are a great shining example for other companies to follow suit. Of course, cost is everything. I mean, how much do solar panels cost? They have, as Alexis says in this episode, it's a big CapEx play. They need to get money in order to build a system. But when it becomes circular, then it's just going to run by itself, really, and not going to have to use so much OpEx. Then it ends up becoming a little bit more business friendly.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing not just how they continue to scale, because as Alexis says, they're going to be producing 1 million square feet of their material by the end of this year, 2023. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see, one, what that scale looks like, who their initial customers are, and then what does it look like when they start building more of these facilities? Because I think that they're on board with this distributed biomanufacturing, and they could take biomass waste anywhere to turn it into their biomaterials.
Yeah, I love that whole distributed idea where they're not taking resources from one place and then taking all those resources and shipping them somewhere else to be processed, but having a lot of small places around the world where they can take their local fruit waste or really any type of organic waste material for their microbes to produce this leather, which looks really cool because Alexis gave us samples. And just when he shared the samples with us, I was so amazed. Like, I didn't know what to expect. I saw some of the pictures of the psyllium, but in the raw form, and it looked like chicken tenders, as he mentioned in this episode. But when he brought the finished product, I was like, this could be a Coach bag. This could definitely be. And it was this beautiful hunter green, like leather, one of my favorite colors. Like, just imagine like gold metal accents on that leather. It was just so luxury.
Right.
And I was just very impressed. What product do you think will be the first products that any customers can access that have Polybion alternative leather in it?
I don't know. They do a lot of prototyping. I have a wallet of theirs. I've seen shoes that they've made locally. I've seen them make like small briefcases, but I wouldn't be surprised if their first mass product isn't a shoe or a sneaker or maybe a higher end handbag. Who knows by who? Said Coach.
Yeah.
It could be Coach, maybe it'll be Gucci, who knows? We are seeing this trend where luxury car makers are offering a vegan option. So we shouldn't be surprised if someone like Volvo comes along and is using their material. I don't know what the first thing they'll be in, but I'm very excited for them.
Pants, leather pants.
Leather pants. Green leather pants.
I definitely buy a pair of those, I guess. I don't think I own any leather clothing. This is not my style.
I have a leather jacket that I have shelved for many years.
It's not very comfortable, but maybe Polybion will make a comfortable leather alternative that
there you go.
Feels like cotton but looks like leather. I guess I've seen like those like liquid leggings, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing those are comfortable, but
are those leather? I don't think those are
They're not leather, but I think they're just a very shiny material to make it look
I bet they're
leather.
plastic. I don't think they're going to be doing that. I'm not sure that material is as stretchy as whatever they're making liquid leggings out of.
Well, they have to be like, they have to be like, just like for example, Shara at C16, they look towards the beauty industry because the beauty industry is looking for alternatives and making sure that their ingredients are coming from sustainable source because the customers want that.
Right.
So where are the customers that use leather, but they're looking for that sustainable alternative? So maybe there are sneaker wearers. Maybe that's like the campaign that they can use as their entry point to not only look at the product, but share a story of this material, which is what Adidas and Parley for the Oceans did with that shoe.
Right. It's true. I think it was a great episode. If you liked it, please let us know. Leave any questions.
Definitely comment. We would love to see your comments, not only on our website, but if you see us on social media, we are posting these episodes at Messaging Lab, at Grow Everything, or on pretty much every channel.
We'll have show notes up that include the transcript and a link to how you can get a hold of Polybion. Keep listening, share the episode, and thanks for spending the time with us today. Until next time, talk to you soon.